Welcome back to History Class with Dr. W and our continuing discussion of American popular culture. In previous lectures, we've discussed a number of significant themes illustrated in the culture of the 1980s. But much of the popular culture of that era was neither consumed with fears of the Cold War nor a celebration of the resurgence of conservatism. Many of our favorite movies, songs, and television shows of the 80s were simply good entertainment. The 1980s stands as a golden age in Hollywood. In addition to regular releases in the Star Wars and Star Trek series discussed in previous lectures, there were many other great films and series. At the movie theater, the 80s was the age of the blockbuster. We've already talked about movies like E.T. and Return of the Jedi, but others included Raiders of the Lost Ark and Beverly Hills Cop, which appealed to moviegoers of all ages, and each made hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. They also spawned sequels and franchises that carried on throughout the decade and beyond. The 1980s was also the heyday of the teen coming-of-age film, and movies like The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Footloose stand as classics from that decade, and there are many others as well. Movies like The Breakfast Club in particular illustrate the struggles of coming of age in the 1980s and the various cliques and groups that populated every school, small town, and city in the country. It was also a decade of massively popular romantic comedies like Splash, When Harry Met Sally, Moonstruck, and Dirty Dancing. All of these drew huge audiences and spawned massive followings, and a movie like Dirty Dancing featured a soundtrack that also churned out a series of #1 hit songs. It was also an era of franchises and sequels, some good and some not so good. The 1980s saw multiple editions of hit franchises such as Star Wars, Jaws, Indiana Jones, Lethal Weapon, Beverly Hills Cop, Superman, Star Trek, James Bond, Ghostbusters, Back to the Future, and many others. A few franchises are less stellar, but nonetheless churned out at least 2 or 3 sequels to the original film. These include movies like Crocodile Dundee, Police Academy, Naked Gun, and a number of others. And just for a little contrast, the 1980s also featured a number of animated favorites, like The Little Mermaid of 1989, but also a series of top-selling horror films, including Halloween, Friday the 13th, The Shining, and a number of others, including Poltergeist as well, which crossed over from simply being a horror film to also being one of the top drawing movies of the decade, and one which spawned sequels of its own. For the first time as well, Americans were able to watch movies and expanded programming at home. The arrival of the VCR and home movies allowed Americans to watch their favorite movies at home over and over again. Invented as far back as the 1950s, VCRs became more widely available for home purchase in the mid-1970s. By the early 80s, they were becoming a fixture in most homes, and video rental stores sent VCR use through the roof. While opening up another venue for revenue, the home video industry also left Hollywood confronting a familiar challenge: how to draw viewers to the theater when cheaper options were available at home. The movie industry was further challenged by the rapidly growing availability of cable television. As more homes acquired cable, viewing options expanded dramatically from the 3 or 4 channels available on regular television. The growth of movie channels like HBO and Cinemax, and pay-per-view, meant that more movies were available for Americans to watch at home. So once again, Hollywood producers were encouraged to find ways to accentuate the big screen experience. Directors began employing great soundtracks, special effects, loud noises, and sound effects to make the viewing experience worthwhile and compel Americans to spend their money to go watch the movie in the theater rather than staying at home. Americans also had a wealth of options in terms of popular television shows in the 1980s. In addition to the shows already discussed in previous lectures, one of the popular genres was the situation comedy, or sitcom. Among the leading shows of the decade was The Cosby Show. Building off his wildly successful stand-up comedy special, Himself, Bill Cosby launched The Cosby Show as a family-friendly sitcom very loosely based on his own life. Cosby played Cliff Huxtable, a highly successful black obstetrician. Felicia Rashad played his wife Claire, and the couple raised 5 children, working through their teen years and young adulthood. The show aired from 1984 to 92, including a 5-year run as the #1 show on television. Despite its nearly all-black cast, the show rarely addressed racial issues in any serious way, unlike previous shows like The Jeffersons and Sanford and Son, drawing criticism from some who felt the show glossed over the still significant race problems in the country. And Bill Cosby's stunning fall from grace under a wave of sexual assault accusations in 2018 further tarnishes the show's legacy. Still, with its wild ratings success, The Cosby Show helped to pave the way for other programs with largely or all-black casts, like In Living Color and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Other popular sitcoms offering an unconventional view of the American family included Roseanne and Married with Children. The 1980s also saw the dawning of 2 new popular television genres, the courtroom drama and the medical or hospital drama. Today, television is awash in crime, courtroom, or emergency room type programs, typified by the Law and Order franchise. While not the first in this vein, several shows in the 1980s revealed the possibilities of such programs, and they've only multiplied from there. One of the most important, groundbreaking, and popular shows of the decade was the police drama Hill Street Blues, which aired from 1981 to 87. This show paved the way for the multitude of police crime dramas to follow. The show focused on one police precinct, and of course involved arresting criminals and cracking cases. But it also paved new ground. The show followed characters not only in their work-life actions, but also their lives at home. Each episode unraveled several storylines at once, some resolved in that episode, and others continuing over many episodes. It also combined fast-paced dialogue, violent action on the streets, and humorous moments. The show introduced a number of now common innovations, the previously on montage to open each episode, the roll call in the precinct to start the action, and often a closing scene of main characters in bed at the end of the day, reflecting on the events of the day. The show also focused on the plight of inner-city minorities more than any show to that date, providing a counterpoint to the social Darwinist narrative common in the country at that time. As one critic described it, Hill Street Blues is on the short list of the most influential TV shows ever made. Whether through shared actors, writers, directors, or through stylistic and thematic complexity, its DNA can be found in nearly every great drama produced in the 30-plus years since it debuted. Thus, it is considered one of the most important shows of all time. Among the most popular dramas of the decade was L.A. Law, which first aired in 1986 and soon assumed top billing on NBC's must-see TV Thursday night lineup. The show featured an all-star cast of established and rising stars, along with a revolving door of guest appearances by many actors on their way to stardom. While not quite the lascivious eye candy of Miami Vice, L.A. Law did push the envelope in terms of on-screen romance, as in the 1991 episode showing the first lesbian kiss ever aired on television. L.A. Law also addressed head-on many of the pressing social issues of the time, including racial violence and the AIDS epidemic. Following the 1992 Rodney King beating in Los Angeles and the riots that followed, L.A. Law aired an episode in which one of the attorneys was attacked during the riot. The ensemble cast also featured a broadly diverse group of people, allowing for many storylines grappling with issues of diversity and equality in the country. As was becoming increasingly common, even this dramatic and serious show included many humorous moments, and the quick and witty dialogue became more commonplace in shows to follow. Another influential show was the medical drama St. Elsewhere, airing from 1982 to 88. From the same writing and production team as Hill Street Blues, St. Elsewhere paved the way for the multitude of hospital dramas to follow. While never as popular as shows like L.A. Law, it ranked among the top award winners of the decade and always won critical acclaim. It introduced a number of themes that would become common in such dramas: the relationship between doctors and interns, gritty, realistic emergency room and operating table scenes, and workplace romance between doctors, nurses, and other staff. The show's cast also went on to become a who's who of huge stars in the 80s and beyond, including Howie Mandel, Helen Hunt, Mark Harmon, Tim Robbins, and Denzel Washington. On the whole, the 1980s were a decade in which culture represented many of the serious issues confronting American society: the Cold War, the rise of conservatism, nuclear fears, and race and gender conflict. At the same time, it was an age of escapism, when the silliness of Ghostbusters and Married with Children created blockbuster hits. Some scholars have also noted that the 80s was the last decade before the full arrival of the Internet. The coming-of-age narrative was still viable in a time before kids are exposed to everything in an instant. Magazines and books were not only common, but were actually read. And face-to-face interaction, or an actual phone call, prevailed over more modern methods like texting or email. Perhaps we recall the 80s with fondness, not so much because things were markedly better, but because we weren't constantly bombarded with bad news. It was easier to escape the news cycle in an age when no one had cell phones and messages were not constantly wired directly to you. American lives grew more complicated and perhaps messier in the decade to follow, the 90s. But that will have to wait for another lecture.